students, welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we are going to talk about the various major theories that are there associated with the Russian formalism. So major theories associated with Russian formalism. We have already discussed what is Russian formalism, what are the various theories, theorists associated with it, but today we are going to study them in greater detail. So according to M.H. Abrahams, what actually is formalism? Formalism views the literary works mainly as a specialized use of language and draws a line of distinction between literary or poetic, which you can also call it as poetic, or the ordinary or the practical use of language. So according to them, there are two kinds of language, you can say. There is first, that is the ordinary and the practical use of language that is done by everyone. And there is a literary and a poetic way of language. So they are going to distinguish between the literariness, right? The literariness that is making the language different. The common language is made different. So there are two kinds of language, the common layman language and the literariness, the different language that is used in the text, right? So formalism, basically, they talk about the central function of the ordinary language is to communicate to the audiences a particular message and information by referring to a world existing outside the language. So they're sometimes trying to influence the ordinary language in a certain manner that it becomes beautiful and different and expressive. So these are the various names that are associated with it. So this kind of movement includes some crucial names like Victor Shklovsky. We have Boris Eikhenbaum, Roman Jakobson, Jan Mokroski, Ren Velik, etc. Right? So these are the various writers, these are the various theorists that are associated with it. Take a minute and you can write them down. Okay, let us go forward. So we have already made a video about Victor Shklovsky, who talked about defamiliarization. Then let us discuss an overview about him. So Victor Shklovsky, the time frame is 1893 till 1984. He was a Russian and a Soviet literary theorist, critic, writer, and a pamphleteer. He is one of the major figures associated with Russian formalism. This picture in front of you is of Victor Shklovsky, who has written works like A Sentimental Journey, Zoo, or Letters Not About Love, Night's Move, Literature and Cinematography, Theory of Prose. It came out in 1925 and it is a collection of essay, Third Factory, Hamburg Score, and many more. Right? So we have already discussed about him and we will deal with the others then. Then we have Boris Eikhenbaum. Boris Eikhenbaum, who is a theorist between these time frames, 1886 till 1959, was related to Russian Empire and Soviet literary scholar. He is basically a historian of the Russian literature as well. He is a representative of Russian formalism. He is someone who kept on writing about the Russian Empire and the Soviet literary circles of that time. He is an historian who is writing about Russian literature and he is a representative of Russian formalism. His literary works are as follows: Pushkin as poet, and the 1825 revolt that came out in 1907. Then How Gogol's Overcoat Was Made, 1919. Melody of Russian Lyric Poetry in 1922. So these are the various works of the very important writer Boris Eikhenbaum. Boris Eikhenbaum is also associated with a concept called as skaz, that means to tell, skaz, which means to tell. You can write it down. It is a form of stylization that is based on oral speech. It is a form of stylization that is based on oral speech. Basically, he's talking about the folklore and the traditional, personal, oral stories that were actually being dealt during that time. And in the work, The Illusion of Scars, that came out in 1918, he discussed about this way of writing the story to make these folklores different than the others. And the literal meaning of this word is to tell. It is a way of stylizing the oral speech. Basically, why Boris was so important, he tried to use very technical languages to make humanities field also very important. So he was someone who was associated with structuralism and became very popular in the 1930s. He was trying to use scientific and technical languages so that you can pay more respect and focus to the field of humanities. He also is associated with this term and the term called as the markedness. Markedness. This is also a term that he talked about when discussing about phonology. What is phonology? Phonology is the study of the speech sounds. So he said there are two types of markedness that you can see. There can be marked sound. Marked sound. These are the dominant sounds. The dominant sounds, like the nasal sounds. There can be unmarked sounds that are the non-dominant sounds. So basically, all of them are talking about formalistic techniques to make the normal language beautiful and literary, and you can see the concept of scars and markedness associated with Boris Eikhenbaum. Let us go forward. These are the works I hope you have written. Then we have Roman Jakobson. He was a Russian linguist and a literary theorist who was a pioneer of structural linguists. Jakobson was one of the most celebrated and influential linguists of the 20th century and often is termed as someone who influenced Claude Lévi-Strauss and Roland Barthes and many others. So he is influence. He actually acted as an influence on Claude Lévi-Strauss and Roland Barthes. There are important works by him like The Language in Literature, Main Trends in the Science of Language, On Language, Fundamentals of Language, 6 lectures on sound and meaning, Sound and Shape of Language, Studies on Child Language, and many more. So these are the works that are associated with Roman Jakobson. We also will be having another video where we will talk about Roman Jakobson in greater detail. Then we have Jan Mokrowski. So he is someone who was writing in the period of 1891 till 1975, and he was a Czech literary linguist and aesthetic theorist. His important works are on poetic language, structure, sign and function, aesthetic function, norm and value as social facts. So on poetic language is the most important work by him that came out in 1976. Then we have another work, structure, sign and function, that is associated with, that was written in the year 1978. Then we have aesthetic function, norm and value as social facts in 1970. So you can note this down. He is also someone who is associated with the concept of foregrounding. He is also, Mokrowski, someone who is associated with the concept of foregrounding. And what is foregrounding? Foregrounding are basically those techniques that you can use to make certain things in the text more important than the other. The howling of, or you can say the sound, the only sounds of the the owl. They are basically targeting on the ominous things that would happen, the bad things that would happen. So foregrounding would be, pehle hi they try to create such a picture that the reader's attention fall onto those parts of the text. That is foregrounding. They make certain lines, certain phrases, or maybe certain paras more important, and foregrounding is done. So Makarowski is associated with foregrounding. Then we have Osip Brik. He was a Russian avant-garde writer and a literary critic who was one of the most important members of the Russian Formalist school, though he also identified himself as one of the futurists. Now, what is basically this Russian futurism? Russian futurism is a broad term or a movement of the Russian poets and artists who adopted the principle by Filippo, and he wrote this manifesto called as Manifesto of Futurism. What is this futurism talking about? It espouses the rejection of the past and the celebration of speed, machinery, violence, youth, industry, destruction of academics, museums, and urban settings, right? So it also advocated for modernization and cultural rejuvenation. So for that, they used various graphics, they used various ways of writing. So it is a literary movement, as well as there was this manifesto that was written by Filippo, and the manifesto is called as Manifesto of Futurism. This inspired many Russian poets and artists of that time, many painters of that time, and they started to draw like this, and maybe they were writing around these lines as well. And they started to espouse the rejection of the past. So it's like an avant-garde movement. There is this alienation effect that they tried to create, and they tried to celebrate the fast changing world. They tried to celebrate the speed, the machinery, the violence, the youth, the industry that was coming, and the past culture was not that important for them. They tried to advocate that there should be modernization, fast changing world. And they also said that there is a complete destruction of all the things that were old, like the old academic structure, like the museums, or the other things that were there, right? So this was futurism. And we have this writer, Osip Brik, who is associated with futurism. So he's also an important Russian formalist theorist, right? So let us quickly see what all are who all are the various figures associated with it. So these are the various figures or the crucial names that you have to remember, right? Then in this video, we discussed about Victor Shklovsky. We discussed the works associated with him. Then Boris Eikhenbaum, we discussed about the terms that he has given, scars and markedness. Then the literary works by him. This one became being very important, how Gogol's overcoat was made. Then you have Roman Jakobson, who is someone we will be discussing in greater detail. These are the works associated. Then we have Makarowski, who is associated with the foregrounding. And then we have someone who talked about futurism, Osip. Right? So I hope you understood the concepts clearly. If you have any doubt, you can ask me that in the comment section. Thank you so much for attending the video and looking at it. And if you have any doubts, you can definitely ask that and we'll reply. Thank you.